Welcome back, boxing fans, to another great show with Sean on Boxing. Today, we're talking about Tank Davis's legacy in pay-per-view. Michael Montero just posted something on Twitter or X today, so I'm using that as a reference. But this is coming off of the news that Tank Davis is a November or December opponent is going to be 130-pound WBA champion Lamont Roach. And this obviously is typical of what we see the PBC do all the time. In-house fights, right? Fights that nobody's ever asked for. Not once have you heard anyone asking Tank Davis to face Lamont Roach. Lamont Roach has a lot of fights at 130 pounds for unification he could be involved in. Him coming up to 135 pounds to fight Tank Davis is a money grab on his part, and it's a cherry pick on Tank Davis's part. But then, of course, the same people who go out of their way to criticize all kinds of non-black boxers for what they're not doing in the sport, ducking David Benavidez, ducking this person, only fighting for titles, not fighting competition, whatever, blah, 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 blah. We know the hypocrisy we see day in and day out, right? These are the same people that are going to defend Tank Davis. And I'm not here to hate on Tank Davis. Tank Davis is one of the most exciting fighters in boxing today. He's on my pound for pound top 10 list, even though he hasn't done what other fighters on the pound for pound top 10 list have done. He's never unified, right? Every other fighter on my list has or is in the process of unifying titles. Tank Davis is the only one who's never done that, right? And that's significant. Because when you're not unifying, it means you're not fighting the best guys in your weight division. And all people want to see the top guys do is fight great opponents. Obviously, you're not going to fight great opponents one after another, after another, after another, but to never have a great opponent. Let's break down this list. You can obviously see it right here, but it's, what are your thoughts on Gervonta Davis's pay-per-view opponents? And whatever happened to Tank Davis's Muslim name? Is it that he no longer is pushing that narrative, or that nobody really paid attention to it to begin with, even his fans? Because literally I never hear anyone call him the Muslim name, and I don't think Tank Davis is anything close to being a Muslim. Not at all. But maybe he is, right? That is the trendy thing to do for black Americans right now, just like it was in 1960 and 70 when Muhammad Ali did it and some others did it as well. So I guess what goes around comes around. But let's break this list down. So in 2020, for his first pay-per-view, Tank Davis went back down to 130 pounds to take on newly crowned champion Leo Santa Cruz, who won that title against a non-top 10 WBA ranked opponent. It was a cherry pick opponent to do what? Elevate Leo Santa Cruz to the position where now this fight made sense. Because the PBC and Al Haymon knew that if they were going to put Tank Davis into pay-per-views, they needed a valuable kind of an opponent. Not a dangerous opponent, but an opponent with name recognition. And that was Leo Santa Cruz. The same thing they did with Errol Spence fighting Mikey Garcia. Not a dangerous opponent, but a name opponent, right? How are you going to pull that Mexican money onto this pay-per-view? You got to throw these fighters in with a Mexican fighter. So there you are. Leo Santa Cruz 2020 went the way most of us predicted. Leo Santa Cruz didn't have the kind of power to keep Tank Davis off of him. Tank Davis never needed to feel threatened at any time in that fight against light punching fourth weight pseudo champion in Leo Santa Cruz, who since then hasn't done anything. So it also shows you that he was at the end of his career as well. But let's chalk that up as a great win for your resume. Then he went up to 140 pounds to fight a WBA regular champion in 2021. Not one of the real champions at 140 pounds, but literally a nobody, but who was Mexican, right? In Mario Barros, once again using that Mexican recognition to try to pull that Mexican money to the pay-per-view. You're going to do a pay-per-view, you do what Floyd Mayweather did. And you can see early on in this part of his career, when he was actually working with Floyd Mayweather, he always fought Latino fighters. right? Because they were using the Floyd Mayweather metrics. Fight on the Mexican holidays twice a year against Mexican Latino fighters to try to pull in that Mexican dollar, right? Because obviously Tank Davis is pulling in the black dollar, but to make these pay-per-views successful, you need that other demographic, the Mexican demographic. So they fought Mario Barros, who wasn't a big crowd favorite, didn't have a big fan base, but was Mexican. Then moved down to 135 pounds to face Isaac Cruz. Isaac Cruz, who was a replacement opponent for Rolly Romero. He was a guy who already had losses in his resume. Nobody knew who he was. He wasn't considered one of the top elite fighters at 135 pounds. Obviously, he was just a replacement opponent, but he fit that replacement because he was a Mexican. Then in his next fight, in 2022, went on to fight Rolly Romero, another Latino fighter, right? Obviously a guy with a bit of name recognition. We'd met him quite a few in Floyd Mayweather's uncle's videos when he would go through the gym and always talk to other fighters and make predictions on fights. So at that time, Rolly Romero had built up his name because he was a big mouth and a bit of an asshole. So people were very excited to see potentially Tank Davis knock his ass out, which is exactly what happened. Then in 2023, he pulled up Hector Luis Garcia from 130 pounds, right? So we've seen this pulling champions up so that you can be fighting a world champion, right? We just saw JB praising Tank Davis because he's fought 10 world champions, but yet he doesn't talk about context. He goes so far as to criticize other fighters because of the lack of quality on their resumes, even though they have just as much, if not more, world champions on their resume. But then he moves the goalpost to praise Tank Davis for having 10 champions on his resume. He also made a video prior to that talking about all the undefeated fighters that Tank Davis had fought, right? We saw people do that with Stephen Fulton leading into the Inoue fight. Yet if you do that with Canelo Alvarez, then people dismiss it and move the goalpost once again, right? So you fighting all these undefeated fighters is great, but when Canelo Alvarez does it, they're cherry picks, exposing your blatant racist narrative once again. Then after Luis Garcia, he went on to fight Ryan Garcia, right? Ryan Garcia, really, out of everyone he faced, the only legitimate fighter to sell a pay-per-view. Ryan Garcia literally had a fan base, something Hector Luis Garcia didn't have. He was an unknown 130-pound world champion who hadn't beaten any quality opponents. Rolly Romero, fucking never seen as a very good fighter. Isaac Cruz was unknown. Mario Barros, virtually unknown. Leo Santa Cruz, well known, past his best, far above his best weight division. And then after Ryan Garcia, no longer working with Floyd Mayweather, now all of a sudden, Tank Davis is breaking protocol, no longer fighting Latino fighters. And this is shown in the pay-per-view numbers. His last fight fighting Frank Martin, a very good, highly rated 135-pound fighter, but not a champion, not a guy who's never fought a champion, not a guy who has ever been in a world title fight, not a guy who's ever beaten a top 10 lightweight. Tank Davis fought him, beat him, and now lo and behold, apparently, as it's being reported, and I don't know if this is confirmed or not, but pulling up Lamont Roach from 130 pounds, once again, doing what he did with Hector Luis Garcia, right? And of course, the haters or the Tank Davis fanboys will say, well, Shakur Stevens ducked him. William Cepeda ducked him. Vasily Lomachenko ducked him. This guy ducked him. Everybody's ducking him, right? Yet, has he ever actually given anyone a legitimate contract? Being the A side means you're the one with the money. You're the one offering people career high paydays to make fights. We see this with Canelo Alvarez all the time. See, that's the difference between Canelo and Tank Davis. When people say Canelo is the face of boxing, it's based on legitimacy, based on numbers of his pay-per-views, based on how he can manipulate boxing and make fights happen. Cross over to other platforms, pay guys so that they step into the ring and fight him, even if it's against their best interest. That's what Canelo does. He gets the fights he wants done. Whereas Tank Davis, on the other hand, hasn't been able to do that. Didn't get the Devin Haney fight, didn't get the Teofimo Lopez fight, didn't get the Shakur fight, didn't get the Lomachenko fight, didn't get the Tevin Farmer fight, didn't get the Berchelt fight, right? All these potential unification, big money fights that he could have had, he hasn't got any of them. What he's done is primarily cash out on Mexican fighters until his last two fights, right? No longer with Floyd Mayweather, and already they're off script. And being off script potentially is going to hurt the pay-per-view numbers of his last two pay-per-views in 2024. The one good thing you can say about 2024, like 2023, at least he's had two pay-per-views. Prior to that, he only had one in 2022, one in 21, two in 21, one in 2020. So at least he's being consistent, fighting twice a year. But the truth is, who's he fighting? Nobody is going to be excited about a possible Tank Davis versus Lamont Roach WBA 135-pound world title with an underlying fight of David Benavidez versus Jesse Hart, right? Those two fights in and amongst themselves are not the kind of fights that are really going to sell the pay-per-view or make people really that excited. You throw on Figueroa versus Vargas, okay, now of course you're pulling more Mexican money into it. Now it's a little more interesting. It's a legitimate 50-50 fight. You throw the two Charlos on this fight card, and okay, now all of a sudden we have a pay-per-view that people are excited about. And Tank Davis's opponent is not that important anymore, and David Benavidez's opponent is not that important anymore. But a lot of it's going to be determined based on the strength of this pay-per-view card. Because if you're charging $90 for David Benavidez versus Jesse Hart, and $90 for Tank Davis versus Lamont Roach, I'm sorry to tell you, there's no buzz. No one's going to be super excited. I had to defend David Benavidez versus Hart on my channel because people are hating on it, even though it's not bad. It's better than Gvozdyk. But the truth is, that's how people feel already. What do you think the reaction is going to be for Lamont Roach? Lamont Roach is not a good puncher. He's not a big guy. He doesn't bring any real legitimate advantages into this fight, except that he's a WBA champion at 130 pounds. So if that's the case, go fucking unify at 130 pounds. But maybe they know that his mandatory is going to be a guy who's going to beat him. And instead of fighting their mandatory, getting beat and losing out on a big payday, they figure they'll just cash out right now. And for Lamont Roach, it makes sense. I can understand why his team is cashing out on a Tank Davis fight. You can make $2, maybe $3 million in this fight, which is more money than you'll ever make in your career, and more money than you've made already. And for Tank Davis, this is just a typical in-house PBC opponent, low risk, move forward, collect your $10 million, and then wait for the next fight, right? That's what it is. But let me know in the comment section below, what do you think? Are you excited about a potential Lamont Roach fight? Is this a pay-per-view card that right now has you excited? Let me know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Peace out and enjoy your weekend. Remember, this weekend, AJ versus Daniel Dubois. Now that, my friends, is a legitimate 50-50 matchup.